Today I paint the Ogre War Boss from Atlantis Miniatures. For those of you out there like me who have only painted the cheaper end of miniatures such as Reaper Bones, bumping up from £3 per mini to this one at a bit over £10 seems to have made a big difference. I recently painted this dwarf from Cybor? I don't know how you pronounce it, and if you compare it to a dwarf from Reaper Bones, you can see there is a big difference. It should be, right? Kind of stating the obvious, but I wanted to show this for the people like me who haven't seen the difference and are worried about spending the extra money. Now, although this is an Ogre War Boss, I actually want to work on my human, skin tones, so I'm going to be painting this probably as if it's a giant or something like that for my games. Okay, so getting started, I clean up the mould lines, I give him a nice bath, I prime him, just in black this time, no zenithal today, I drop him and break the handle of the hammer, I prime him again, and finally I get to sit down and start painting. I've recently been trying out the methods of the likes of Sergio Calvo and Angel Giraldez. Their painting methods struck a chord with me and I'm really enjoying it. I've taken photos of the miniature prior to do anything else as a guide for the lights and shadows if I want a reference for that. I've slightly diluted the paint, but not much. This method is not about putting down lots of thin glaze layers to build up contrast, which I think is why I like it. I lay down a nice base coat. Hopefully just one coat will do, but I'll come back again for a second coat anywhere that needs it. Now that I have that in place, I will glaze with the same colour from black into the Rhinox hide, wherever I want to soften the difference between the layers. It might be tricky to see, but I left black between the fingers here. There's also some black left under his armpit and chest area here. So, moving from Rhinox hide now, up to Tan by Vallejo Game Colour. This is a slightly more saturated version of Citadel's Bugman's Glow. I want this to be a rich, warm skin, and that's why I'm experimenting with this formula. So I restrict myself now to only being able to paint within the Rhinox hide layer. This is something I've always struggled with in the past. I try not to go to the edge of the Rhinox hide. That way we get a gradient of tones instead of a harsh cut layer from the shadow to the highlight. Being able to see the in-between tones in most places. So I'm keeping this in mind as I paint. Again, using the reference and thinking about the shapes and volumes of the model. At this point, I'm not really thinking about the specific light source for this paint job, but instead I just want to make sure every shape is defined and makes sense. Another tip is to think about the entire miniature. Don't paint it muscle by muscle, because you will end up with muscle islands, as Emil from Squidmar Miniatures says in his video.
We don't want to highlight just the center of each of these muscles, because that's going to create something that I like to refer to as muscle islands.
So paint the entire arm, or leg, or chest as the light would hit it, which often means there'll be connecting lines of paint or light between the muscles. Once you are happy with the placement of this layer, then make sure it is a solid, smooth coat. Go over again if you need to. Then we can again do a simple blend between this and the Rhinox hide layer, by doing a simple glaze going from Rhinox hide to tan. These glazes won't affect the newest layer because it's the same colour. It will just be toning the layer below, in this case Rhinox hide, up to the tan. Now we have black primer in the shadow still, in very, very small areas. Rhinox hide is a dark shadow, and now tan is a lighter shadow. Next, I'm going to use Cadian Flesh Tone from Citadel's paint range. So now I'm restricting myself to just painting within the boundaries of that tan layer, trying not to go up to the edge to keep our transitions, and to be able to see all of the tones in between. Now, something I've noticed with this particular technique is it can be difficult at times to know where to stop. At least for me, like I say, this is something I've struggled with. So another way of doing this is to not blend it at all. That way you can clearly see each layer and we can work on the blending later. Because we haven't mixed our own colours, because we're not working with 20 or 30 different tones, we don't have this very artistic looking wet palette of moulded and mixed colours, it's quite easy to go back and be able to use Rhinox hide or tan or Cadian Flesh Tone or any of the colours that we need to glaze in between. I want the light central to the figure, above and in front, maybe at 60 degrees from the horizontal, if that makes any sense at all. This means the light will be strongest on the centre of our figure, and now painting the next layers of highlight I will start restricting myself more to the centre of the model. Our next colour is Basic Skin Tone from Vallejo Model Colour. Exactly the same method, laying down a solid layer, what some would call a base coat consistency, now in just the areas of the model that would get the light. Not thinking about volumes and shapes, but how the light would actually fall on them. Once I'm happy with this layer, I blend it using a single glaze and move on to the next highlight. Another thing I've learned is to start to think about where you want to give focus to the mini. It stands to reason the legs wouldn't get as much light as the chest or head, and I also don't want to bring much attention to the legs, as nice as they are. So at this point, I might consider the current highlight their highest highlight, and not paint them any further. That means that we will go brighter on the chest and hands and face, and that will bring focus to those areas. This also allows for more contrast on the miniature, as doing this will mean the skin is not uniformly lit across the entire miniature. Some areas will be brighter, and therefore bring more interest to the skin as a whole. With this laid down and blended in with a glaze where desired, I will use a light flesh from Vallejo model colour to bring attention to certain areas of the miniature, mostly the face, raised hand and his chest. This area is where I would like the eye to go first. This will go on to a very small amount of the miniature. This is the result I was able to get. There is a pretty nice range of tones, although there aren't perfect blends because there is enough contrast that eyes do some of the blending for us. The contrast is working for us, but even though it isn't uniformly lit, we do only have up to 5 layers of paint on the miniature. So there isn't much tonal variety, and this is the last step. Decide on your colours and glaze them into the relevant areas. This is the part I need to study up on. Colour theory is such a huge topic and something I need to know more about. Right now I try to keep it simple for my own sake. Do I want to have a cold or warm effect? I could cool the shadows down with some blues, purples, maybe greens. I could have a more flushed, perhaps rage-induced face by adding some reds or magentas, something like that, into the cheeks and nose. Or perhaps onto the elbows and knees to show wear and tear. Think about the emotions that go along with certain colours. Think about what you want the scene or story of the miniature to be. Now, I don't have a great plan when I get to this stage. I just try some things out. Sometimes I like the results, and other times I get annoyed with myself for kind of ruining the paint job. Once you glaze different tones, it's going to be harder to go back and fix different areas, so make sure you're happy with the skin in terms of where the lights and shadows and everything else fall up to this point. If you think the shadows got too dark, you could glaze in with highlight colours. Or if you think the highlights are too bright, you could glaze in with some midtones. This will not only help the blends, but you have a bit of control as to the contrast level that you have on the miniature at this point. Now, I'm not going to talk about specific colours that I use because I think this is perhaps a weaker area of mine, and it also comes down to, like I say, the emotions and the atmosphere that you want to portray in your miniature as to what you would use. And this is the skin finished, at least for now. Want to see any other areas of this miniature painted? I have some little goblins from Atlantis Miniatures as well to paint, so I'm looking forward to trying out some green skin tones. What do you want to see? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, see ya!